Earlier this year, and if you're watching this sometime in the distant future, earlier in history, Bruce Springsteen released Tracks 2 consisting of not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 lost albums. Both lost and albums are slightly misleading terms. They were only lost in as much as they were in Bruce's vault, and we should only really think of a couple of them as albums per se. Semantics aside, it was a lot of new Bruce Springsteen material, and therefore a lot of new material for me to talk about. Who am I, you say? I'm Dustin Lohman, a singer-songwriter and music critic of sorts who just completed a deep dive into Bruce Springsteen's studio work. I pledged to my loyal audience to get into this material, which I consider somewhat supplemental to Bruce's main canon once that was done. In this video, I proved that I'm nothing if not a man of my nerdy word. Nerd, nerd, nerd. Nerd is the word. So in this video, I'm going to rank the lost albums from worst to best, and then at the very end, integrate them with the rest of his studio album tier list. Before we get going, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my page. Transparently, YouTube pays me by how well I engage my audience, so when you click those little buttons, you effectively put $1 in my digital tip jar at no cost to you. That's groovy. Alright, Tracks 2, the lost albums, worst to best. Let's go. Number 7, Twilight Hours. This album, I fear, is a bit ponderous. This was recorded alongside and I think is meant to be a sort of companion piece to Western Stars. The main issue I have with Twilight Hours is that it is incredibly monochromatic. The songs are long, they are sort of largely indistinguishable from one another, and frankly, I don't think this is Bruce's best vocal affectation. I don't think he's as gifted at singing in this style as he is in a folkier style or a more rocking style or any of a number of other vocal affectations he's tried throughout his career. He's basically employing the style that he used on Only the Strong Survive, which I think is one of his worst studio albums, to an album of original songs not covered. There's something to be said for the experimental nature of this album, you know, him writing with music that he's not accustomed to writing with, but experiments are most interesting when they're effective, and I just don't find this one very effective. The two questions that we have to subject these albums to is, one, is the music intrinsically interesting, and then two, does it add some sort of unique insight into Springsteen's career that we wouldn't have had before? So the first question on Twilight Hours, not particularly, I don't find it particularly interesting, and to the second question, I'm not 100% sure that it does. It shows you that he's willing to venture into a sort of soulful compositional mode, but not that he's necessarily able to master it, and the sort of Twilight nostalgic production approach that he uses here was used much more effectively on Western Stars. You know, with the exception of him using a few more major seventh chords than he usually does. Sonically, there's not a lot of novel information here, and in particular, not a lot of uniquely resonant novel information. It feels like he's experimenting in a vein that's very new to him and that does not exactly fit him like a glove. So yeah, Twilight Hours confidently in place number 7. 6. LA Garage Sessions 83. There are a couple reasons why I rank it this low. The first is that I'm not sure this really qualifies as an album. Listening to this feels a lot more like listening to an outtakes or demos collection than it feels like listening to a full-fledged album. I know that there's a level of semantic obnoxiousness in me saying that. I think that the frame you put around works of art really matters. It has to do with how the audience reads them or interprets them. If you tell me something is a collection of outtakes, I'm going to listen to it with a much different mindset than I listen to an album with. I think I listen to albums of outtakes with a sort of like light, whimsical curiosity, like, oh, what didn't quite make it? What can we learn from this about the stuff that did make it? Whereas if I see a work of art with the gilded frame of the term album or novel or something around it, I'm going to look at it with my sort of full critical disposition. I don't think that this album really stands up to that scrutiny. It's longer than I think a Bruce Springsteen album from this material would really have been. I mean, especially in those years, he had a tendency to make his albums pretty lean. There's no discernible structure to this collection. There are songs that were released elsewhere, and there are sort of alternate takes of the same song on this album. Whether or not you agree with my semantic argument there, for me, that is a mark against it as a listener. The other reason I don't think it stands up to that scrutiny is just because aesthetically, it is not all that strong of a presentation. It sounds somewhere between Nebraska and Born in the USA. It's a little bit more produced than Nebraska, a little bit less fleshed out than Born in the USA was. Whereas Max Weinberg was playing the drum parts on Born in the USA, here he's either using a drum machine or playing some very rudimentary parts himself. Certain of the parts have stylistic seeds that you can see how he might cultivate in a more dedicated session, either on his own or with a band. But that's exactly what I'm saying. They're seeds, they're not fully watered and nurtured plants, if you will. This feels like a collection of sketches toward an album that maybe never came to fruition. Not that there's no reason to listen to this. I think especially Bruce, superfans will get a lot of value out of hearing that interval between Nebraska and Born in the USA, and seeing the missing link in evolution between those two aesthetic presentations. But, in and of itself, the music feels sketchy, the lyrics feel kind of sketchy. It has some sort of academic interest as a collection of outtakes, but is not particularly strong as an album, in my view. 5. Inyo. So we now begin to get into what I would consider to be albums per se. Inyo is a completely thematically coherent album. Sonically, it's very coherent. There are many moments in these songs that really stick with me and that I think are worth paying close attention to. I love the refrain of the title track. I don't particularly like the verses, but I love the refrain. I think the production in Adelita is for the most part pretty effective. The main problem I have with this album, and I talked about this a lot in the studio album tier list series, is that Bruce uses this incomprehensible southern accent on so many of these songs. I mean, I listened to this album 4 or 5 times with full attention, not distracted, with full attention, and I could not understand what he was saying, and that is infuriating to me. One viewer in a comment, I think on The Ghost of Tom Joad, put it really well, and I'm paraphrasing, but he seems to think that articulating lyrics in such a way as to make them only partly comprehensible makes them sound as if they're coming from a character with that vocal affect and therefore more real, feel more real. And to me, that is just not the effect at all. Listening to any singer where I cannot understand their words because of some affectation that they're putting on makes me think, one, that they're not aware of how they're coming off, and it always feels bad to watch or listen to somebody who doesn't seem self-aware. And then two, that they don't really have a careful, close understanding of the affect that they're putting on. If you're using an affect that is not yours natively, and you're not doing it in a way that makes what you're saying communicative, it makes it seem like you don't really understand what you're doing. And then it feels like by using this affect, you're sort of wearing a Halloween costume as opposed to inhabiting a character the way a great actor does. Is that a problem on every single one of these songs? No, it is not. There are certain songs where you can understand him pretty clearly. Maybe it just reveals something about my taste. I am so bothered by not being able to understand the verse lyrics on a song like Inyo, which is otherwise a really beautiful song. It's hard for me to consider it in high esteem. Additionally, I think some of the sort of border town musical motifs come off as a little bit cliched, and again, sort of using cliches that you're not that familiar with. When he ventures into another style, sometimes he does it with a lot of depth, and sometimes he does it sort of superficially. And in this case, I feel it's more on the superficial side of the spectrum. This does feel like an album to me. It has a handful of moments that I find very affecting. Much of the production is tender and feels good to listen to, and there are just a couple of prominent aesthetic moves that I find ill-advised, some of that border town production, and then just the poor Southern-esque enunciation that he uses for his lyrics. So Inyo in the 5th spot. Good one. 4. Faithless. This is a film score that he recorded for a movie that was supposed to be called Faithless that never got made. It's a little bit like his Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. I think the strongest thing about this album is its production. The instrumental tracks are totally good. I would not have thought of Bruce Springsteen as a particularly gifted musical composer specifically. He's a great troubadour. He can put music and lyrics together in a way that gets right to the nerve of the thing he's talking about. But if you isolate either one, they don't convey that same effect. So the fact that the instrumental tracks are really good is important. There is at a minimum something I like about all of the songs on this album. The main mark against them to me is that there's very little variance in either subject matter or mood across all the songs. The main issue to me is that there's an abundance of faithfulness and a real absence of faithlessness. The title track is the 3rd track on this album, and it's about the main character, rediscovering his faith. When that happens so early, it feels like it takes some of the conflict, some of the plot engine out of the rest of the project. Who knows what would have happened in the movie? I have not read the script, so I have no idea what, how these songs relate to the actual arc of the movie. But I also feel like that's kind of irrelevant, and especially when the songs are presented this way, I can only look at it as an art object of this type. So those are my critiques, but I find All God's Children pretty rousing. I like the song Going to California. I mean, it's obviously a sort of go west young man type of song, but a good companion piece would be Tom Waits' Going Out West, a chest beating, chest bearing type of song. This is not that. This is really this feels more like going on a pilgrimage than like going out to conquer unseen territory. And that feels like a cool and novel tone for a song of that type. The production is pretty universally strong on this album, similar aesthetically to Inyo, but just more refined, less cliche. I think he's dealing in territory that he's more intimately familiar with, so it feels less superficial. I wish there were more darkness on this album. I don't feel a lot of darkness. I feel a lot of looking and reaching toward the light, I don't feel a lot of the darkness that's sort of compelling you to do that. I wish there were more interplay between those two. That's my main critique. So, Faithless, number 4. 3, Perfect World. Perfect World fits very comfortably into the sort of lineage of Bruce 2000s or 2010s albums. Aesthetically, it feels like a big, broad, arena E Street Band album in the vein of Magic, and the subject matter for the most part is loneliness. There are a lot of songs on this album that feel like sort of second-tier Bruce Springsteen rock songs. I'm Not Sleeping is one of those. Rain in the River is one of those. Idiot's Delight, I would say, is one of those. None of them are going to supplant Born in the USA or Hungry Heart or Badlands for that top spot, but they're all sort of pretty fun, pretty energizing, pretty emotionally resonant songs that you wouldn't be upset to hear at a concert, I don't think. The contemplative Blind Man, I think, is a good reprieve from all of that large rocking energy. There are also a handful of missteps on this album that are also reminiscent of missteps Bruce would take in the 2000s. The Great Depression would be one of those. Production-wise, he engages this really soft, almost like Honda commercial folk production aesthetic that I think is totally ineffective. If I Could Only Be Your Lover sounds like some of the songs on Working on a Dream that I think are a little stylistically misguided, like Show You What Love Can Do. And then You Lifted Me Up reminds me of some of the moments on Wrecking Ball or on Letter to You that I find too reminiscent of religious music. Not that music doesn't have a place somewhere, but it's just not what I go to Bruce Springsteen for. This is another album that does something I think Bruce does reliably well, where the last song and the title of the album cast a nice shadow over the rest of the material. In a perfect world, I'd be able to rise to every occasion, but we're in a nearly perfect world, so I can't. It gives a nice sturdy basis for the exploration of loneliness that most of the rest of the album is. This feels not that far away from Magic, like a decent Bruce 2000s album to me. So, Perfect World, number 3. 2, Somewhere North of Nashville. Bruce does country rock pretty well. Interesting about this album is he recorded it simultaneously with The Ghost of Tom Joad, which in terms of its mood could not be more diametrically different from this album. I think he was doing it in part to cleanse his own palate from writing and singing such emotionally intense songs on The Ghost of Tom Joad. And I would say this is an almost entirely effective, almost entirely complete take on the country rock genre. The upbeat country rockers, of which there are probably too many, are for the most part fun and interesting. I don't know that we need Repo Man, Delivery Man, and Detail Man. Keep any one of the three and I think you enjoy the role that it would play on this album. Another very nerdy quibble is that in Tiger Rose he says, "Let me read some prose to you, any verse will do." That's not what prose is. Prose is sentences and paragraphs, not lines and verses. Sorry, but it annoys me. If you're going to take poetic license, you have to know the difference between poetry and prose. I'm sorry, that's the rule. I think the back half of this album is where it really picks up and where the style begins to cohere. The best songs on this album stand pretty well on their own as good country songs. I love the song Somewhere North of Nashville. I think the take on Western Stars is more effective than this one, but I still love the song. Blue Highway is a really nice country song that really could almost be a Hank Williams song. Silver Mountain, You're Gonna Miss Me When I'm Gone, Janie Don't You Lose Heart. I don't think any of them are pillars of great Bruce accomplishment, but they are all good country songs. It's not as simple to write a good country song as you might think it is. Like Twilight Hours were one of my main issues, that it's similar experiments, only a couple of which are really effective. Somewhere North of Nashville would benefit from a pruning of redundancies. And again, for the purposes of an outtakes collection, it's interesting to see him work on the same style, the same theme in Detail Man and Repo Man and Delivery Man. But from the standpoint of album construction, when there are redundancies like that, it feels unnecessary. It hurts the dynamic arc of the album, it doesn't help it. My two main issues with this album are that there are some stylistic redundancies, and also that there are times where he's sort of doing country rock, again, in a sort of superficial way, as opposed to bringing some different lens to it that we haven't seen or heard in country rock before. There's a pedal steel because there's a pedal steel in country rock, so we have to give the pedal steel guy a solo. It feels de facto, it doesn't feel fresh. But for the most part, this is a pretty coherent album with a lot of enjoyable songs that constitute a singular stylistic entry in Bruce Springsteen's catalog. So, Somewhere North of Nashville, number 2. 1. Streets of Philadelphia Sessions. This is the album that emblematizes what this series wants you to think that it is, but what it often isn't. Full-fledged, standalone albums that didn't see the light of day for reasons that are either good or not so good. The reason Springsteen cites for why this one didn't see the light of day is a not very good reason. In the promo video for the box set, he talked about how he had made 3 albums about relationships, referring to Tunnel of Love, Human Touch, and Lucky Town, and he thought after that trio that his audience wouldn't hear this album the right way, which might have been true. Unfortunately, what we have in the sort of main canon, if you will, is Human Touch and Lucky Town instead of this one, and this is a much superior work to either of those 2 albums. The main reason I think that is because, yes, it is a relationship album, but it's a relationship album cast in a very different light from any of the other 3. Tunnel of Love is a real searching, sort of almost therapeutic relationship album where he's digging into and stating his insecurities in song form. Human Touch and Lucky Town are just stylistically all over the place. Neither of them is a really essential document in and of itself. Neither really feels like it explores themes that weren't already explored on Tunnel of Love, perhaps with the exception of Living Proof, being a father. This one really feels like that really dark side of relationships, worrying that you did something that really is going to destroy things. And that's as much to do with the production as with the lyrics on this album. The production is dark. It's the combination of the looped drum tracks and then the synth parts and minor keys, which create this darkly hypnotic vibe that he sings over. And it's effective. I don't think this is a classic Bruce Springsteen album, but it is certainly a good, if not very good, Bruce Springsteen album, and one that it was a shame to have lost in the lineage of his 90s work. Imagine a world where instead of Human Touch, Lucky Town, Tom Joad, take the 10 or 12 best songs from Human Touch and Lucky Town, put it on an album called Better Days, a couple years later release this one, a couple years later release Tom Joad maybe, or combine Tom Joad with some of the best songs from Somewhere North of Nashville, and then you get a 90s with 4 or 5 albums that are at a minimum listenable and enjoyable, if not good or very good. Something to be learned about releasing 2 albums on the same day. It may make sense from a marketing point of view, but not from an artistic point of view. Subject matter-wise, it feels fresh. Production-wise, it feels fresh. From Blind Spot to The Little Things to Secret Garden, this is really Bruce showing you into very dark rooms with things that maybe you're not supposed to be seeing in there. It's a tone of sort of dangerous intimacy, which in the context of these albums is by far the most fresh and the most effective. This one is everything that this series claims to be and often isn't. Number 1, Streets of Philadelphia Sessions. And now the moment that the nerdiest among you have been waiting for, integrating the Tracks 2 albums with the rest of the tier list. This is going to be a little bit messy because the albums in this series have a lot of differences from the albums in his main canon, notably that most of them were not polished in the same way that those main canon albums were, and also that the philosophy by which the albums in this box set were assembled differs from the philosophy by which his main albums were assembled. Namely, the box set is supposed to present to you curiosities that give you some insight into what he was up to in years you might have thought he was doing nothing, and the main albums I think he wants to present as the primary links in his artistic evolution. So, it's messy. But, it's fun. So I'm going to do it anyway. 1. LA Garage Sessions 83. Getting right to why this is messy. Again, this is more of an outtakes collection than an album, but we're gonna do it anyway. Once you shift from just evaluating them on their own to putting them in the context of the rest of his career, you shift a little bit away from what does this reveal to me, and you shift toward how much fun do I have listening to this. I don't really enjoy listening to this from front to back. It's too long and not aesthetically diverse or deep enough to be a really interesting standalone album. But it's also not terrible. It's not a worthless album, and it's not a terrible listen either, which is not that different from how I would describe Lucky Town, which by sheer virtue of brevity, I think has a slight edge on this one. I would put the LA Garage Sessions just behind Lucky Town in the C tier. 2. Streets of Philadelphia Sessions. I do consider this to be the best album in this box set for a variety of reasons. It's just the best collection of songs, it's the best exploration of themes, it's the most interesting production, it's the freshest sound and style presented in any of these albums. And like I said, I think there's a lineage of the 90s that looks a lot better with this one front and center. I certainly don't consider it a classic Bruce Springsteen album, but it is better than probably half of the rest of his catalog. For its coherence, freshness, and completeness, I would put it just behind Western Stars in the B tier. 3. Faithless. My general feeling about Faithless is that it's a mostly pleasant, often interesting, if not entirely satisfying exploration of the theme of faithlessness. It always sounds good, there is something I enjoy in every song. I wish there were more faithlessness than faithfulness in the album, but I certainly don't resent having to listen to this. For its being an enjoyable and enriching, if not altogether satisfying listen, I would put it at the very bottom of his B tier. 4. Somewhere North of Nashville. General feeling about Somewhere North of Nashville is that it is a mostly complete, maybe with some redundancies, exploration of the country rock genre, with some songs that I think are entirely good country songs, a bunch of songs that I would be happy to see him perform live. Not as successful either in terms of style or completeness as Streets of Philadelphia Sessions, but still quite successful on the whole. Having said that, I don't think the theme themes he's exploring here are as deep as much of the rest of his work. Even Magic, which is not an album that I adore, but I do think that the themes, the subject matter is more moving overall than this one. So I will put it just behind Magic in the B tier. 5. Inyo. No. I don't really look forward to listening to this. I don't resent having to listen to it as much as I resent having to listen to Springsteen's worst albums, but I really don't look forward to listening to it. I think if you cherry pick the best moments, the best lyrics, the best production, the best choruses, you have a lot of enjoyable material, but as a unit, it just does not do a lot for me. I would put it just behind the LA Garage Sessions in the C tier, which I know I ranked it ahead of that in the main series, but again, the criteria for ranking here is slightly different than the criteria of ranking within the box set. The 83 session, I think, is a more enjoyable listen on the whole and a less cohesive album on the whole. I don't know what to tell you. That's how I feel. 6. Twilight Hours. I don't plan ever to listen to this again. I really don't. Each of the rest of the albums on this box set, I will at least put a song or two on a playlist or, listen to them from time to time. This one I won't. I think this is a mostly unsuccessful album. I don't think this vocal affectation is that strong. For all of the jazzy chords that he's using, I don't think the music is all that strong. It's too long of an album. It's too monochromatic of an album. It's just, I don't think it's successful on almost any level. I hate to say it, Bruce, but that's just how I feel, as if he's watching. I would put this behind Working on a Dream in the D tier. 7. Perfect World. My feelings about this are very similar to my feelings about Somewhere North of Nashville. Pretty cohesive album, some stylistic freshness, but him exploring this subject matter is not as rewarding as him exploring a lot of the other subject matter that he's explored in his career. I do expect I'll listen to this from time to time in a similar way that I expect I'll listen to Faithless or selections from Faithless from time to time. Compared to Faithless, I think this is a fuller and more multifaceted exploration of the themes that it explores, but that subject matter is not as deeply moving to me as most of the rest of the albums in the B tier. So I would put it just ahead of Faithless in that B tier. That's a lot of talking about outtakes albums. What is revealed about Bruce Springsteen in this series? The main thing that's revealed is that he was always working very hard, even in periods where you didn't know he was working, like a lot of the 90s, or periods where you did know he was working, like the 2000s, where he released 5 studio albums already. He was still producing a lot of material that didn't see the light of day until now. I think at a minimum what the fact that he was always working tells you is that he's incredibly devoted to his craft. He's never just sort of skating by or living on past laurels or past successes. He is always trying to come up with something new and something newly moving. Does he always do that or do that to the same magnitude? No, of course not. But on most of the work that he produces, there is something of serious, value that's worth paying attention to. Take Faithless, for example. I don't think it's a great album altogether, but even something like All God's Children, the guitar parts that he comes up with there, the sort of slightly off-kilter construction of the verse lyrics is interesting. The refrains that he picks on that song. Compositionally, there are things to learn from that song and ways to be moved by that song. I would apply a similar description, a similar reaction to a lot of the music in this series. Is what we learned from the series that he had a lot of classic material hiding in his vaults that we didn't know about? I don't think so. And I think there are people who will say that, but I think that's really the sort of misguided take of a Bruce acolyte, a Bruce disciple. As somebody who loves his best work and respects most of his catalog, I would not describe myself that way. Bruce is like a musical factory worker. He's always diligent, he's always careful, he shows up on time, he clocks out. If nothing else, he is always putting in the hours, he's always putting in the sweat equity. To be honest, I think with the exception of the Streets of Philadelphia sessions, which is a really good album in its own right, I don't think there's a lot for non-Bruce superfans here to dig into. This is a treasure trove for people like me who are either sort of Bruce superfans or who are very devoted songwriters and want to learn something about how one of the world's best songwriters got to be that way. So yeah, what do you think of my takes? What has your experience been listening to this music? Do you think that I got it right? Do you think I got it wrong? I am open to any and all critiques as long as you say them nicely and thoughtfully. If you do, I will respond. If you don't, I won't. But as always, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.